if or when are we going to see some real political will and determination and also financial support to transfer from gas to more renewable energy sources? Now, I'm talking specifically about former East Bloc countries and their households, which are even today heavily gas dependent.
Well, of course, I'm not from an Eastern European country, okay, but still, at the same time, in the Netherlands, we used to have a very big gas bubble under our country. So in the 1960s, it was obliged to hook up every household with a gas-fired heating system or gas piping. And so even now, nowadays, 90% of all our homes are linked up to a gas system and have their own gas-fired boiler system. So the problems are similar to us as they are in Eastern Europe. And for us, our ministers or we as a government say, okay, well, we have to get rid of those. So by 2050, all these gas-fired heating systems have to be gone. And that's once more, so to provide that clarity. So yes, you now have this boiler system, but it won't be there in 10, 20, ultimately 30 years time. So you have to take action, and we have to take action together. So if you know that if your gas boiler system breaks down, then you have to be very clear that you cannot buy another one and just install that one, but you have to look for alternatives. So that's what we provide. And of course we subsidize alternatives, and we're also looking into, okay, what kind of alternatives are there, and that can differ per district actually. So in one district where the homes are really new, then you can go to an all-electric solution, and in others where there are very old monumental houses, then you'll need something different, like a district heating system, for instance. And that's what we are then going to install there. But of course, that'll take time. So that's what we are talking with our citizens. So that's, I think, the way forward. It's not just as a government paying for all the alternative systems, but working together with the citizens and the private sector and say, okay, well, what are the alternatives and where should we install what kind of alternatives? And getting that out there. In the Netherlands, we have, and then I'll stop, we have an initiative called Natural Gas-Free Districts, where we are going one district at a time to remove the gas systems and install different systems. And that will be, well, we currently have 64 districts where we are rolling this out, and the solutions are in every district are different. But the prime objective there is to work with the local citizenship to discuss with them, okay, the gas-fired systems will be gone, but what is the alternative? And we'll have to tackle that together and then discuss that one house at a time. So that's the way we do it, at least.
I wanted to react regarding the political will, because I think that's a very crucial and serious question. So I agree with all Robert mentioned before, but I think the point is, we need the political will and the courage to change our energy system, because we are in our old centralized energy system with new technologies. And so I think we need much more ambition to cope with the transition. And one example is in Germany. So for example, we have absolute green light at the moment for 4 very big LNG terminals. So that's a lot of money. It's a high speed. And if we would have the same speed and the same money for the renewables, for energy efficiency, I think we would have a future-oriented and sustainable solution. And I think so. Exactly. Here we see a lot of possibilities and opportunities, but still stick to the old system. And that's a big problem.
It is a very good question, I must say, and this is the topic that I was also debating with other experts, because indeed nowadays, since the Russian invasion, but also actually since autumn 2021, we can see the rise in prices of mostly gas. It started with gas. Then also with other energy sources. So definitely this is the greater chance for renewable development. But even regardless, the recent shocks on energy markets. In the long-term perspective for heat pumps, the perspective for ground heat pumps is even more than 20 years, and they are more efficient than air heat pumps, but they are also more expensive. So for this to calculate which one you prefer, you need to have calculations on long perspective for both type of devices. But anyway, to come back to the question, for the long-term perspective, regardless of the recent events, renewables will be becoming cheaper, because fossil fuel based energy investments will becoming more expensive anyway, in Europe due to higher ETS prices, for example, which will probably also encompass heat produced in households and also in transport. So we will have new ETS system where we will have to pay for CO2 emissions also from heating sources in households. So definitely for the long-term perspective, heat pumps and other heating and also electricity green sources will be more competitive.
I think energy becoming more expensive is actually one of the, so to say, negative incentives for people to change habits. And if you look on the bigger markets, like it's not specifically heat pumps, but if you look in US, you have wind and solar, it's already competitive. So it is, what you need really is this kind of positive and negative incentives for people to change habits, because all this thing is about households. It's changing habits, and you need certain push or pull to how to achieve that. So we have the New Europe, or the Green Deal, also is providing packages of support for that kind of transfer.
I think that depends a lot on the technology. So, for example, the heat pump needs electricity. And if you have a PV system on your rooftop, you will gain the electricity from your own system, and the energy price will stay as it is. And if that's the case, you will profit from these rising energy amounts. But if you rising energy prices, but if you need to get your electricity from the grid and you need to buy it, then also the electricity prices will rise, because in Germany, at least, we have the merit order system. So the most expensive power plant, which still produces electricity, sets the price for all power plants. So that's the gas power plants at the moment. And that's the reason why the electricity prices rise just as well as the gas prices. And so also the heat pump costs will explode. And that's the reason why it depends on where you get your electricity from. The same is with the electric car. But I think that shows just as well how important it is to get a little bit independent from the fossil fuel. So we need to raise the amount of renewable energies in our electricity sector to get less depending on other countries and on the fossil prices.
I think, of course, the issue is sort of different on different generations. And one thing that some of the options are not available for the households, just the options to turn down a little bit the heating system, just to get smaller bills. And people in the Middle Ages used to live in or sleep overnight in the pretty cold rooms. But that's again the habits. And so we have to learn how to receive comfort with different situations. So another thing is that people have very, very different perceptions, and suddenly or sadly enough, this energy is becoming a luxury good. It's a luxury if you get kind of enough cheap energy. But I am true believer that energy should be pretty expensive if we want to solve the climate crisis. That's a big motivation to do so.
Well, it is true that an energetic restoration is quite expensive, and a motivated person might be able to live for a few days in a cold room and using hot water bottles and warmer clothing. But I think that's not the way to deal with the problem in long term, and especially not for everybody. So I think there are several opportunities we can. I mean, we don't need like 25 degrees in our room in the winter. So we can reduce our energy consumption a bit by reducing the flow temperature of our heating system. But to decrease our primary energy consumption in a bigger way, I think we need the energetic restorations for our buildings, and we need to use more efficient heating systems, just as well as cooling systems. And the best opportunity for that is the heat pump.
As I said, the problem with household energy users is that they usually don't make long-term calculations like the business do. So when you consider long-term perspective, you may see with some assumptions of firstly increasing prices of fossil fuels, decreasing prices of renewable appliances, because with the increasing mass production of heat pumps and solar panels, the production itself of it will be cheaper, and the production of electricity from solar panels is zero, right? Because there is no fuel. There is some maintenance only, but there is no fuel. So when you do a calculation for the longer perspective, and also if you may use some incentives from government, which you should check on, then the calculation should be more positive for renewables. But also, I wanted to refer to the approach of wearing warmer clothing and using hot water bottles. I'm not sure how we should use hot water bottles just to warm our body, I guess. But for the idea of wearing warmer clothing, definitely, if you may not use heating, and instead of this use warm clothes and isolate your windows in a very simple and cheap way with some kind of the tape, which is really not expensive to do. Definitely it's better to do this and save energy, but also save your bill. But I'm not sure where that person asking question is coming from, because I come from Poland. So in Poland, there is no way to not use heating during minus 15 degrees in winter. But I was also living in Portugal when indeed there were occasions that the temperature was in January around 0 Celsius degrees. And there were houses without heating systems. So the people were wearing jackets and hats, and maybe even they were using hot water bottles, and they were fine. If the temperature is like this, and if it's only couple of days during the year, then I think it's fine. The problem is with countries with much cold winter. But anyway, even if in these countries, in countries more in the eastern part of the Europe, I am not sure about the scientific articles about that. It's just my knowledge and my experience that people are heating their rooms with too high temperature. Definitely, we don't need to have 20 or 20 plus Celsius degrees in winter to be comfortable. Definitely, we could use a little bit of our heating system and warm clothes, but we won't survive without any heating system. So we will have to rely on renewable sources in some time.
Well, there are several ideas on how to make a landlord upgrade his or her buildings and how to install solar panels or to do a energetic restoration. And I guess the most known idea is probably to make the landlord pay at least a part of the CO2 costs for heating. But the problem or the critics on this point is that the landlord might just raise the rental fee. So at the end, the person renting the building is still has to pay all the CO2 fees. So there are critics that have a reason. There are some other ideas like balcony PV. So in Germany, we are allowed to install 600 watts of PV systems in our or at our balcony, in our garden, wherever, and to just plug it in the power outlet. But of course, this is not allowed in every building as well. Another way might be to become a member of a energy cooperative. So in Germany, that's called a Energiegenossenschaft, and there you can invest some money and you can decide as well on where to build a renewable power plant, and also you can get the energy from this power plant. And I think that's a very good way to invest money to become part of a local renewable energy project. And I think there is hardly any better way to also raise the acceptance for renewable energy projects than to enable the direct investment in these projects.
Here it's a kind of difficult situation because Roberta would have to influence the opinion of other person. I'm not sure if I am aware of any solution to force nowadays landlord to install solar panels. Although in recent European Commission statement Repower EU, there is an idea of installing solar panels of the roofs of all the new buildings, both residentials and business, etc. But this will be this might be legislative only for the new buildings until 2030, I guess, and later for all the older buildings as well. So if this will be made mandatory in this way, then the landlord will be obliged to do this. The other idea for Roberta, if she's really active in this topic, is to try to show some numbers to her landlord. So again, I'm coming back to my my previous statement of showing the long-term calculations of our electricity bills, because I guess that the landlord, he's renting the flat, so he's probably caring very well of his business, and he would like to see some savings. And if he sees them, then he may use them. But also for some people owning the houses, it's very difficult to find the perfect solution, the company that would install the solar panel. So it's good to know some support in a municipality, that they can help with some calculations, they can provide consultations, etc. So if the landlord doesn't know the solution himself, maybe Roberta could help him to find support in this topic. So I was thinking about the solution of having impact on development of renewables. There is an idea, and I would advise Roberta to check if it's already implied somewhere, of having power plants or other energy sources, not only for electricity, with shares spread among citizens. So for the people that live in a block of flats where they may not have impacts on the possibility of installation of renewables, there might be a chance to have a share in a business which is growing energy, green energy sources in some other place, and it doesn't matter where this energy finally goes. What matters is that green energy is produced, and that citizens may have really impact on this business.
Oh, this is maybe a longer question, because you don't need only to look on the households, you have to kind of look on the energy communities, total of the neighborhood communities, neighborhood houses have to join in together, because that reduces costs, first of all. Then you create a grid where, you know, not everyone is suited for the solar panel, but some neighbor house can be. And as I said, one thing is these incentives which the government or community can provide. But with the technology, the solar panels are becoming cheaper. So you should look a little bit ahead, and the calculations should be economically don't need to be done at the spot, so to say, at current time. They have to be kind of discounted over the period of exploitation, that battery. And so your bill will be later more reasonable. So that's where you have to look. And so you have to have right calculation. Is it really expensive or is it not?
My name is Marie, and I will have two questions related to innovation. First one, how can the EU bring together as a twin transition, digital and green transition, within the digitalization of energy? And the second question would be, we know there's already a lot of innovation taking place at member states level. How can we scale them up at EU level as quickly as possible?
Well, it starts first of all with getting the people nationally on board, and we already exchange a lot between member states. So we as governments do that. I was actually in Athens last week discussing the implementation of the EPBD, so the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, with all other member states. So we were there together with some 110 people discussing, okay, what are the best practices and the worst practices around there, and what can we learn from one another? So that is already taking place, and we can learn from that. And what we also continuously do is to collect best practices in member states and distribute them among one another. So, for instance, taking back to the thing Dennis mentioned, we in the Netherlands have, for instance, a sectoral approach for utilitarian real estate. We say, okay, when we're starting to renovate schools, for instance, then we sit together with all the people who are managing schools and say, okay, well, this is one portfolio, and how are we going to renovate this portfolio to become climate neutral? And that is different when it comes when you're talking about schools. Then that's a different ball game compared to hospitals or police stations, etc. So in the Netherlands, we have 15 of these avenues where we sit together with the people involved and say, okay, let's sit together with the school boards, let's sit together with the hospitals, with the care people, etc. The monuments is another avenue, and that's right now we do that on a national level, but we are already linking that up with people internationally to say, okay, well, this is what we have learned in our experience when we're going to renovate primary schools, for instance, and what can we learn from other countries? So but you have to start bottom up. Another thing, maybe now you have given me the word, to what Katarina mentioned on engaging communities. Well, that's another thing we're doing in the Netherlands, where we say, okay, if you want to build a wind turbine, we as a government should not decide where to build it, because then you attract all kinds of NIMBY responses. Indeed. So what we do these days is that we say, okay, we have to organize a local community, and we have to incentivize them that the local community actually owns about 50% of the local wind turbines or solar fields in order to get them on board. And that's another thing that we are distributing across the EU, that we say, okay, well, if you have large local ownership, then you get less not in my backyard kind of behavior. And that's what we see all over the place. So this is taking place, but it is about exchanging information. And you cannot really solve that by only setting new norms and standards and stuff. It's also about behavior. And that behavior is more or less the same in each member state, I think.
Well, I think so. First of all, regarding digitalization, I think the important point is also trust. So, because we see, for example, what do we like? So we have some resistance, for example, with digitalization, but we also see that we use, for example, a lot of social media because we see a lot of advantage for ourselves. So I think it's very important to have here trustful cooperations. That's one argument pro communities, for example. From the technical point of view, so talking about local energy markets, so we need some digital tools, so we need more data. So I agree with Dennis, so we need the consumption side, so we have some forecast, but we really need how much energy is needed, is used, how is the forecast, for example, and here we will have some support of digital tools which needs to be applied in a confidential way. And I think that's also can be included in energy communities. And here I see, so regarding the questions of the twin of digitalization and energy transition, so I think there is a lot of light we should use, and which will be also implemented in local energy markets and also driven by energy communities.